see it. Oh, yeah, you're missing. Well, I know most of you by first name for 3 or 4 decades, but I'll introduce myself. I'm Billy Michael. In 1986, around here, something happened. That sign was made. That sign was made by a guy that was the painter at the Danbury Fair. And the Bethel Action Committee was formed. In that same year, a man named Dr. Fan formed the Independent Party. And while most people we've regarded over these nearly 40 years, the BAC and the Independent Party is anti-tax, what we really are 2 organizations that sought to diffuse the concentration of power. Whether it was the concentration of power that was held by 2 parties, Democratic and the Republican Party, or it was the various interest groups that make up the annual town budgets and then go to a town meeting and are very forceful because, of course, they created the budget. So we sought to amplify the voice of the taxpayer for the past 37 years. That's who we are. That's who the Independent Party is. That's what that is. I have to mention something. There was a woman from Ridgefield. You may remember her, Edith Gleason. Edith Gleason. When Governor O'Neill came out with the Blue Ribbon Housing Commission, she wrote and wrote and wrote. She said that this, where we are now, is where the Blue Ribbon Housing Commission of 1989 would lead to these debates, this tension between local zoning, autonomy, state regulations, fairness, affordability. So I would like to dedicate this event to Richfield's Edith Gleason. She was prescient. Who knows Edith? She was there ahead of time because you always wonder when things go bad or when things change. You say, didn't anybody speak up? Edith spoke. She spoke 30 years ago. I'm going to hand this over to Cynthia. Everybody knows everything now and know who the BAC is and who the Independent Party is.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Portfield. I'm the Superior Planning Committee.
Yeah, we're sliding, Billy.
I'm the chair of the Bethel Independent Town Committee. And Billy and I put this together. We put the word out. Everyone seemed very interested, so we're kind of disappointed that more people aren't here. And we are still awaiting Francis Pickering, but we will start. First, what I'd like to do is tell you what we're trying to do, which is just to open a conversation. People have different views on this. It's become very tense, the whole situation. The main points on either side of extreme seems to be all zoning decisions made by the state, or to leave it to local authorities, and then the middle might be some sort of collaboration, but it's developing into a bit of a cauldron. So I want to introduce the panel. I was hoping that you could say like a minute of what you do and who you are. So here's our late entry, Senator Wang. Just a few words, as I know you like.
I'll be very quick. What an intro. State Senator Tony Wong. I represent portions of Bethel, which I'm honored to. But more importantly for this informational session, I am a member of the Planning and Development Committee, as well as formerly the chair of the Housing Committee in the General Assembly. For the last 6 years, I've been actively involved in regards to planning, development, housing, A30-G, and the interactions relative to it. So I'm excited to be part of this panel. Thank you for being here tonight on a rainy night, but also for the viewers. I hope this is informative and instructive. Cynthia?
Okay, hi, I'm Allison St. Germain, so I'm just a Bethel resident, just like all of most of you. I've lived here in Bethel for almost 18 years, and I had no idea that I lived in the TOD until this past summer, and things started popping up. And so there was so much I wasn't aware of, and until I started attending meetings and asking questions, I didn't learn. And so I think a lot of residents are sort of in that same predicament that I found ourselves in. And so I'm here because I just started asking questions. And And so, from a resident point of view. On a professional side, I'm the Chief Information and Communications Officer for National Sorority. So I work remotely from home. So I'm in my home a lot, and I see a lot of what's happening around in the neighborhood. But I can definitely understand from a communication and information standpoint how a lot of residents would feel like I feel that a lot of times I didn't know what was going on, or I didn't know the process. And there is a process, and we have to respect that. We have to respect the laws and regulations that we're under, but we also have to understand how residents can get informed and can help make some changes. The really cool thing about that is that I've met some really very interesting people with Cynthia and Billy and everybody who are just completely opposite of people that maybe I would have found myself aligned with politically. You know, it doesn't matter what your political background is, if you're a Democrat, or Republican, or Independent. And so I think that's something that's been really interesting about this entire process. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dave?
I'm Dave Goldenberg, and I've been in Ridgefield long enough to remember Edith Gleason. For a lot of the past 27 years, I've been on the Affordable Housing Committee, and for the past 18 or 20, I have been the chair of it. I always like to come to Bethel. I'm glad that the movie theater is open again. That was heartbreaking when it closed. And some Monday nights you might see me carrying my guitar into the note or notch shape for open mic, so I'm happy to be here and part of your civic discussion.
I'm Maria Weingarten. I'm from Canaan. I've lived there for 23 years. I'm a former auditor with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I'm currently a realtor with William Ravis, so that's what sort of brings me into the realm of housing and real estate and how this impacts our markets. And so that kind of inspired me back when it started out with Sarah Cronin 2 years ago with Desegregate Connecticut, and I just started getting more informed on all of these different terms that I really didn't have as much of an understanding of, like inclusionary housing and all these other things. So that's what brought me to it, and I'm one of the co-founders of CT 169 Strong, where we're in advocacy fighting for the rights of our property owners, and making sure that really the idea is to bring together the stakeholders and make sure that those people who know best, that are local to their communities, have a voice.
Okay, so, like I said, it is a touchy subject, and I know it is. And so what I want to do is hopefully just throw it out there, like where are we going up the stairs? Where is the tension? And if you could each maybe identify what that is, and because it seems to be very polarized. So would you each say what you think is going on?
I would say the tension is that people don't know, they're not being really informed about what's in the bills. Things are happening and they're not exactly out in the open, and they're not discussing the potential impact of the bills like fair share, where you really should know what your numbers are and how much that would cost your town and all of the implications. But those are things that the press aren't necessarily reporting on, and even the legislators are not discussing. So I think that creates tension and mistrust.
Okay.
And that's what we've been trying to do, is make sure we inform the public so they understand what's in the bills.
What do you think, Dave? Where do you think this schism is?
Well, I think in this age of social media, misinformation and just simply wrong information travels even more quickly than factual information. And it's like playing whack-a-mole to try to have it down. So that's why I'm really glad that there is a forum like this. Another problem, I think, and I'm sure we've all noticed it, is in the past couple of years there's been a marked decline in civility. And I don't know exactly where it comes from, but I know that scare tactics have been used quite a bit. And that's why, again, I just think it's really healthy to have a direct, honest, civil conversation.
Okay. Well, you talked a little bit about it when you were...
Yeah, I can echo that. I do feel, and many of you in this room, we struggle to find information, but then also do it appropriately. And a lot of things can look really flashy and shiny, like on the surface, right? But then you have to kind of dig underneath to get what's behind that. And so a lot of the pieces, as far as, when we think about affordable housing in Bethel and where our numbers are, I've learned a lot. We're a lot higher percentage than a lot of the other towns around us, which is great. We're still not at the level that the state wants us to be at, but we're a lot better than some neighbors. And it's been interesting because the fair share numbers that the 169 Strong group had, completely open information to be able to look at and digest and see how would that apply here. It's refreshing to be able to put your hands on information and then to make a rational decision about that. And so I think for a lot of us, things don't also move fast either. And in today's world of information, and I work with college women, they want it now, right? And it doesn't work like that. So when you have a master plan for developing a town, it's a 15 to 20 year plan, but it doesn't lay dormant on a bookcase for 20 years. You have to be working it, right? And so if your master plan is saying you need sidewalks, you need bike lanes, you need bus service. I actually just spoke to a friend I ran with the other day. She said, we now have a bus that comes to downtown Ridgefield. I was like, I didn't know that, because one of my arguments this past summer was, if my husband wanted to get from Bethel to work in downtown Ridgefield, there was no way he would get there. And there was no public transportation. And so we have to have those things. So a master plan like we have is wonderful, but it has to be a working thing. And a lot of our residents, it's not something in their day-to-day thing. So I think information and how fast we don't move can hurt, but it's not a bad thing either.
Tony, from a legislator's standpoint, would be.
I think it's just the perfect storm. You have the state dictating the policies of saying we want to accomplish something and providing a solution for all 169 towns, unique localities, each with its own municipal government. And it's dictating a kind of a one-size-fits-all when it comes to zoning and affordable housing and A30-G. And it's counteracting the sense of local municipal control and people's trust in their planning and zoning and feeling that they have input. And ultimately, also for many individuals, it's their personal property, their personal right. When you make an acquisition to buy a home, you are entering into a social contract with your town and saying, I'm coming into this district, I'm coming into the zoning, this is my expectation. And to have a one-size-fits-all kind of a dictate is emotional. And that's where we are. And then you add in the fact that towns are being accused when they don't meet the numbers without fully understanding the challenges of topography, environment, and density issues. You also have, welcome to that world, right? Sorry. And then you combine with an advocacy organization that calls itself Desegregate Connecticut and impugns into communities that, because you have not fulfilled the diversity and the accessible housing, that you are lacking social equity and that you are, in essence, discriminatory and racist. I think that imposes a higher emotion of where we are right now. In 6 years of this, I've seen it from both sides. It is an inherent distrust that exists on both sides of the argument. And you indeed, as Mr. Did I say the name? Goldenberg said, there's distrust on both sides, and there's truly not effective communications, and I'm grateful that this is a forum where we can articulate and allow the people to understand what's confronting them.
Okay, thanks. I just want to introduce our first selectman, Dan Carter, who just came in. He's here. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Dan.
So
But
that.
we also have Representative Marty.
Oh, Marty
Marty
Patel.
Patel.
Yes. Are there any
Pleased to
other
be here.
celebrities here?
You?
Oh, well, I so Dave, I was curious, when we were all talking about communication, so where do you think the misinformation or the scare tactics are coming from? Where do you see it? Is it on Facebook? Is it on the news? I'm just curious, because you mentioned that specifically.
Well,
it's a very complicated subject area, affordable housing. And advocates on both sides necessarily reduce everything to something that's messageable. So for example, 8-30G is a one-size-fits-all solution. But the work, live, ride bill, I believe that they went a long way to make sure there were ways to tailor it to the current conditions and situations in each town. Yet, when we resort to calling it everything one size fits all, that mischaracterizes it, and everybody's going to see it as one size fits all without taking the time to dig in. As I said before, it's a very complicated subject, and the only way to be really informed about it is to invest in time.
Okay, just a point of information, because you've been mentioning desegregate Connecticut. He was invited, Pete Harrison was invited, and he committed to being here. And this is just a point of fact. He saw the lineup and he backed out because he said they were hostile. I'm just repeating what he said. I have documentation, no hard feelings, but I wanted him to be here, we all did. Okay, so both sides, you think, are guilty, if you want to say that, of putting out extreme information, or?
Well, it's messaging, it's communications. When you're an advocate, you want to try to find messaging that resonates and works. Sometimes what works and what the truth is aren't always exactly the same thing, so there's a tendency to exaggerate. Does it happen on both sides? Probably.
What problems you specifically have you found, because you've been on that housing committee for many years, what have you specifically found as obstacles in Ridgefield, or what resistance do you come up with Ridgefield?
That's a really good question. People are frightened by what they hear. We had a president a number of years ago who told people they're coming for your suburbs. I mean, think about that. They're coming for your suburbs. And who he was talking about was housing advocates like me, and I'm not coming for Ridgefield. I live in Ridgefield. It's my home. But people hear that kind of rhetoric and come to these meetings angry. They come in angry, and nothing prevents civil discussion than the overflowing of anger. So I would say it's that sense of anger and being aggrieved that's the biggest obstacle at this point.
Okay, so the solution to that is to get better information, because if people are feeling that way, generally a bunch of people don't feel a certain way unless there's always some element of something there. So should they be acknowledged for their aggrievement, or I'm just curious of how you handle that. Like if they come angry, you say come into the meeting.
Yeah, well, the way I handle it is I just don't get angry and I listen. I understand that these are people who care about the town the way that I care about the town. And I try just to work with clear information and to answer misinformation with correct information. And sometimes I'm wrong, and when somebody points that out, I accept it as well.
Okay. Maria, what's happening? What happens in Buchanan? What have you been struggling with?
Well, I think it really is sort of the clarification on the bills that I just, if it's okay, I want to kind of comment on some of the issues that.
I want to
So as we're talking about this, the work, live, ride bill, yes, it does offer the opportunity for flexibility. The challenge is what is actually in the language of the bill, and that's the concern. And I think there may even be some disconnect between what the proponents of the bill wanted versus what actually ended up in the language of the bill. We did hear that a couple of times from here.
I'm sure there's some more we have to do.
Of course. So, but I think what from our perspective, what is concerning is when it says that the coordinator decides. It's not including the local land use experts, like yourself or whoever is involved, who would be the boots on the ground who understand those things. So those are the kind of things that sort of send up the red flags to us that say, the language isn't clear, and the way it's written can definitely be interpreted to be more one-sided. Now, when you say about coming for the suburbs, I will say, though, that to think about the fair share bill and the language that's in that bill is concerning. So when you have a bill that says if you don't build your fair share, which is a big number, and you have 10 years within which to build it, and we know it's very expensive to build. If you don't build it within that time frame, if you don't have a plan to build it, then they're going to end single-family zoning. And it's going to be literally 15 units per acre anywhere there's town water, town sewer, and anywhere else where there's septic and well, it's as much as the multifamily as the property can bear. So that to me is sort of the definition of coming for your suburbs, because that does bring in density. It takes away what zoning was set up for, which was truly to have a structured way of an expectation of what you're getting into, an understanding of what, you know, what you're buying into, and sort of upending that entirely. So those are the kind of bills, and those are what we look at and consider onerous. And we, you know, we would love clarification. We would love those actually removed. More than clarified, we want those removed, because it's not allowing towns to do the development in a responsible way that honors the environment, that honors the community, the wetlands, the reservoirs that we all, the watershed areas, and that's all really important to all of us who are part of our communities and take a lot of time and care deeply about our towns.
Actually, I did all of my notes. I have no idea what Cynthia's questions are at all.
Oh, no,
But-
don't do this.
Nobody knows. But one of the things I wrote down was that as a resident, we need help understanding the bills and the organizations behind them up in Hartford. There's been so much activity in the past few months with zoning and things, and just even trying to keep all of that straight, because again, some of it sounds flashy, and yeah, I can get behind that. I don't want to segregate our neighborhoods. I would not want to turn people away that can and need. You know, we need employees to be able to, you know, fuel industry, but we also need industry for them to work in. And so, you know, what we've been going on here is that our local leadership needs to take the logic to apply it to Bethel. So, you know, unique situation where we have our TOD downtown area, but technically the only place you can cross the train tracks is right there on Greenwood Ave, right? And so we want to build down further towards the train station. Maybe we'll get a pedestrian bridge, but we certainly won't get another crossing, like car crossing. If we do, who knows when. But all of that was in that Bethel master plan, none of it enacted upon. So when you don't have those pieces of infrastructure in place, but yet you then still get proposals and things coming along for that half-mile radius, which you draw that circle, it's like we're on the wrong side of the tracks. I went to school in Maine. And you can't get there from here. It's like, there's a saying that they say. So again, there has to be a balance between what is coming from the state and then how you enact it in your local area, because quite literally, if you draw a half-mile radius here in Bethel, you are on the wrong side of the tracks in your building, and you're proposing TOD. If we can't get our hands around that, we have to pause. It's kind of like with a child, and they're in the midst of a temper tantrum. We need to pause. And I know we've talked about, can you pause development and moratoriums and things like that? And those are words that people are like, oh, we can't, no, we can't. Well, why not? Because then you can get your hands around how do we implement what is really good about the things that are coming from the state, but make it happen here locally.
I've been watching the hearings, I'm going to get to you in a second. I've been watching the hearings, and it does seem that there's a sense of urgency, and that causes me, because, you know, I mean, how long, I haven't made that 25 years left, but I don't feel urgent, you know, but anyway. But tell me, you've read these bills, you've studied these bills, probably more than anybody here, so what say you?
I think it's important. I want to acknowledge Dave for his work in the affordable housing, right? And you glossed over the fact that this transit-oriented development, or work, live, or ride, or up in Hartford we call it the desegregate Connecticut bill. But you glossed over and said, you know, it's one size fits all. That's the problem. It's simply put. Many of our transit-oriented communities, Stamford, Hartford, and even Fairfield that I know well, in the metro area, have taken these initiatives, have undertaken those. Stratford, many of these towns that want to have transit-oriented development are initiating it on their own. But they also understand the constraints. You have a village train station right in the middle of Bethel. You have small, village-oriented train stations that are just buffered by residential communities all over the state of Connecticut. This bill says you all have to do it. It's one size fits all. Now, if you made that suggestion and said, we encourage you to do it, I would have no problem. But what we have done legislatively is to say, if you don't do it, towns, we're going to take away your infrastructure funds. We're going to take away cleaning of your brownfields. We're going to take away infrastructure of sidewalks. And they say, you can opt out if you want. You can opt out if you want. That's what you're going to hear a lot about this. This is not a mandate on you. But boy, you tell any town that they're going to lose their brownfield remediation, infrastructure, all the discretionary infrastructure funds because you don't participate. Doesn't seem like much of an opt-out for me. Doesn't seem to give people much of a choice. It is a mandate. And that's, again, going back to the emotion. Municipal leaders, planning and zoning, and community says, you're telling me what to do. You have no idea what my town's needs are, what my neighborhoods are. But you've got a great idea. And I'm going to make every town and every transit-oriented develop within a half-mile radius without any local zoning approval to build up density. So for me, when you glossed over the fact that it's a one-size-fits-all, it's deeply troubling. And then to put in the stick of saying, you don't do it, we're going to take away money for your infrastructure, for your sidewalks, for your brownfields. That's what this bill and the way it's passed. And it's not a misinformation. It's clear as day. How do you respond to that as a local town official that cares deeply about your town? That if Ridgefield and its leaders say, we're going to opt out, and you lose your funds. Is that owners?
It's opt-in, as I
Yeah.
understand it, as opposed to opt-out. And I understand the problem with towns having their own needs. Like you spoke, Maria, about the unique, or maybe it was you also, about the unique situation being on the wrong side of the tracks.
I didn't mean the
But
wrong side, I love my
but
side of the tracks.
But I think the idea of the coordinator is to be able to take the specific case of each town and look at it separately. Now, I agree, the language is imprecise, but also, as the senator knows, language that comes out of the committee isn't always what ends up being voted on the floor, and where we end up is often very different from where we start. So I'm hoping there could be some clarity for that. But I think with this bill, and I don't support the fair share bill, because that isn't one size fits all. But I think transit-oriented development is a clear win-win solution for towns, and I'm glad to see the state putting some of its muscle behind it, and also offering incentives to municipalities to take advantage of that.
But it's not an incentive.
Well, the interesting thing about transit-oriented development is it's assuming that they're traveling to somewhere to work, right? And look at the number of jobs that are being cut in our area. So my son is at A30-G precision machining, and machining and manufacturing have been such a big part of Connecticut for however long. Well, they're not going to Sikorsky this spring on their field trip because Sikorsky has gotten their contract. So the machining industry, like his class, is not going on these. So we're losing jobs places, but we're building residences for people to be living. And so when we were sort of faced with that debate here, with what was happening down on Diamond Ave in our neighborhood for a zone change, we've got all industrial properties there. Some of them don't look great, but it's industry, right? And so we're facing a school budget right now that's feeling pinched. And planning and zoning are making decisions about building. Why does it always have to be so much residential? And some of the stuff is coming residential and commercial. But, we're trying to be creative and think, okay, couldn't we, train people to us, come on the train to Bethel to work in industry and things like that. And so, unfortunately, with the timing of it, that would still be something that would happen, but we also do understand that there has to be affordable, there has to be a place where people live, but we're in a pinch right now. Schools are getting more crowded, our police department, they need more officers, we have a volunteer fire department, so again, there's got to be some creative solution to problems that a local municipality can do, and when you're having to decide between that, they need to know how to apply that stuff here.
I think it's a great point. And that's why I believe, and I've always believed, that the way to address housing is holistically. Housing is not separate from economic development. It's not separate from education. It's not separate from health. And that's why it's very important for towns to plan holistically. But we do know from research that businesses, especially larger businesses, the kind we're talking about that would like to come into the area, they look for three things. They want an educated workforce, and Connecticut has that in spades. They want to see transportation so that the roads aren't overcrowded and people are spending hours getting cooked. They don't want to see that. And they want to see housing that's affordable to employees that they can afford to pay. So instead of looking at housing in isolation, let's look at it as part of that very complex equation and then base our solutions on that.
I just wanted a quick, did you have something?
I was just going to add to that. I know we've often heard in a lot of the discussion about ASML and how some employees were concerned that they weren't really finding places to live. One of my greatest concerns about these bills is that it's creating high-density, mostly market value apartments. And that's not necessarily what ASML, when I read the article, they talked about wanting single-family homes. So it's really, it's tricky and it's hard, and that's what makes, which is a frustration of mine as a realtor, to think about the fact that Fairfield County, because of our proximity to New York City, we benefit from the economic engine of New York. And so it tends to make our salaries higher. It also makes our housing costs higher. So that's part of the difference of what we have here. We have a mature market that's influenced by New York. But when you compare that to a New Haven market and a Hartford market, which are way more affordable, relatively speaking, and those are considered lagging. And they are lagging nationally because of, to your point, well, both of you are saying, is this need for economic vitality of our state. And that's really, I think, the missing part of all of this. We don't really see the effort to try to create and spur that, to make this a more business-friendly state that companies want to come to, and make it really a compelling argument for people to move here. And that also, if you have those opportunities and companies start coming in, guarantee that the market will start finding ways to build homes for them. So that's part of the problem as well, is that you have to consider all of those things. And when we talk about TOD, that's not what we're seeing in these bills. We're just seeing, as you said, housing development, not the true mix of all of those things, which is really what we want to see. And I also worry about some of the bills that I see that are going to take away some of those industrial areas. Because when I think as a member of the Board of Finance in New Canaan, what's our mix of what we have as retail and commercial and industry, and why certain towns have smaller mill rates is because they have more businesses in them. Like Greenwich has a lot of hedge funds and all of those other companies, and people go to work there. And so that helps keep the burden of costs down on homeowners. And so we always have to be cautious of when you're trying to replace something with 100% of just housing, and it's rental housing, or it's just, apartment housing. That's the concerning part to me, is that we're not really having a real comprehensive, serious look at how best to address this.
And I just had, because I watched those hearings, this is my 8th year on the Board of Finance at Bethel, so I know when we talk about, they don't say they're going to take away the grants, they say they're going to deprioritize you. And I just remember from being on the Board of Finance, we had so many things that were funded by steep grants. So it's like we get these grants, and then all of a sudden we don't have these grants, and yet we have these lovely sidewalks from steep. We bought a senior center van with most of the money coming from the steep grant. So now we would just become sort of like dry gulch, or tumbleweeds going through, because what do we do if we're not opting in? But we have to, we've already gotten the benefit of the elections, and our school superintendent flat out told me they can't take any more kids. We have almost 100 new students. It's capacity. So how does that work into the bill? Is that taken into consideration, the infrastructure and the town itself, as far as from a financial standpoint?
I can't speak for the bill. I'm a local housing advocate. But I can say that, the unfunded mandate is always going to be a point of contention. But the state, we're all part of Connecticut, right? I'm assuming all of you are from Connecticut, but all of our towns are in Connecticut. And we don't, the authority that we have comes from the zoning area. And it says towns shall work to create affordable housing, find opportunities for multifamily housing. And you would think that because it's in there, towns would do it, but they don't. So when the state feels pressure to meet its goals, it leans on the town. Again, I can't speak for the state or the senator here, who's much more informed about it.
Yeah.
I
Billy has a question.
want to follow up on the fiscal aspect of an unfunded mandate. Beyond the mandate and the denial of infrastructure funds, when you build up the infrastructure surrounding a transit-oriented area, you increase density, but you also increase infrastructure demands, increase sewer lines, water capacity. The municipality is responsible for that infrastructure. Taxpayers are going to bear the burden of this expansion, unless it's reached an agreement with the development companies. But ultimately, that infrastructure demand and the pressure that occurs rests on taxpayers in the town. Then we don't talk enough about environmental considerations. There are many of the train stations running along Route 1, along our corridor, down by the coastline. Many of them are at sea level. Whether you believe in climate change or not, there is rising sea level. We're going to build capacity and increase density in an environmentally sensitive area. Where is the soundness? And under this statute, even if you raise it, they've given some scant environmental consideration, but ultimately, who's bearing the impact? The municipalities and its residents.
I was here for a couple of those charrettes. They did the charrettes in here for the planning in 2016. It was insane. All those words, resiliency. We want vibrancy. Who doesn't want to have a resilient town? No one could define what resilient was. Resilient is this big building across the street here now. That's what, on the sidewalk. A building built on the sidewalk. That's what. If the people at that charrette would never imagine what they were signing on to. And they all loved it. Now, part of that, the sale of that in 2016 was the New Bethelonian. The New Bethelonian was going to use their bicycle. They were going to live on a train, and they were going to use HART buses. These are people that were going to be, and they were going to, and to guarantee that, the parking was going to be half of what it normally would be, because these people aren't going to have cars. So they had the carving park out, the parking mandate park out was reduced, because these people are this new kind of people. I don't know who in hell could come up with this. They could believe it. And I've lived when buses were privately owned. I remember going on a bus that was privately owned. We knew the people that owned the Danbury buses. Now, the state comes in and takes it over. I'm on Route 5 of the Hart bus. It's an empty, gigantic bus all day long. I'm over 65 now, 50 cents, I can get on that bus, take me around. I can go to New Milford for 50 cents. And even better, now it's free because of COVID, and the buses are still empty. They can't give away something for free that we're all saying, oh, we need this transit. Transit, I think it's a scam. I think it's a scam right from the Urban Mass Transit Organization and Association and the Fed all the way down. Doesn't anybody ever say, how can we run empty buses all day long with the brake pedals putting the cadmium on the road, the smoke, all the pollution from empty buses?
Is there a question?
Does anybody push back on empty buses?
And actually, I want to say one thing. So, obviously, I'm coming at this from, I do have a background in higher education administration. I work for a nonprofit. In any corporation or company that I've ever worked for, you have a strategic plan. It is not on the shelf. You're using this, right? And so, when we did the Bethel Forward in 2016, I lived here then. I had young children. Didn't come to meetings like you all had, but it is something that needs to be updated and rethought. So in 3 years, it's going to be a 10-year-old plan. It takes years to implement something. And so we live in a world right now that we did not anticipate 3 years ago. We're post-pandemic. Life completely changed. And so it changed how people are working, how they're commuting, how they're driving. And I think we're at a point in our town that we're open for what needs to change in our master plan. But just like anything, it takes time. And so I do think, and I hear that from other town people.
With the bus, I don't know, is anybody pushing against the empty bus in the state? Can you just run, do we just like, it's like the emperor has been closed. Oh, we have transit, we have mass transit. There's no mass.
Okay, let's
How do you have mass transit without mass?
Yes, I can offer an anecdote, though. I did read a study about it in Stanford, because to your point, North Stanford really doesn't have ridership. They did a study and recognized that it's cheaper for them to hire a cab or
Yes.
an Uber to
Yes.
bring them to where there's actually
Exactly.
people who are riding the bus.
Yes.
But to your point, that is the challenge of Connecticut, right? Because and even this bill, you know, it calls it mass transit,
Yes.
right? And mass transit is what I think of, because I grew up in New York City, so it's like, I think of the subway. That's like frequent service, at least every 15 minutes. It's not based on distance. And to call Metro North that only runs, you know, in New Canaan, there's one time a day where there's 2 trains that run within 20 minutes. Otherwise, the entire day, it's at least an hour. If you miss your train, you're stuck. And so that's the problem, is that we don't have this spider web of needed transit, true public, local, cheap transit. I mean, obviously this bus seems very cheap, but you know, at what cost,
That's
right?
been a topic for many years, is the train, because, and it hasn't caught up with the plans, and that's something that you can only get a direct train to New York City, like in the early morning here, or and you know, 5 o'clock. But Will, did you have a question?
Yep, let me zoom out here.
My bad.
So my question was, obviously, as you mentioned, Dave, that all these topics are so emotional. It's easy to pick one topic and just jump in on it and get really opinionated. But I have sort of a generic question, kind of throwing it back to maybe a little bit of history. One quick aside is, you talk about the busing and all this. If you walk around the bridle trail that was once the Chepaug Railroad line, it's amazing how many railroads we had. Roxbury, New Milford. So sometimes when I'm out there, I'm thinking, man, it seems like we used to have a transit-oriented infrastructure, because you could have trains to go to past Bridgewater and Roxbury, and ultimately failed. But my question is, if you could kind of explain maybe from the state level, because the state likes to help people with their problems. So what started this whole, like what was the problem that the state identified for us to, that said, hey, there's a problem with whatever, we need to step in with this desegregate Connecticut or the A38. Well, just this is a talking point. Historically, what was the moment that spurred the state to say, hey, there's a problem here. What is the problem that they're trying to solve for the towns?
Make no mistake about it, we have a critical need for housing in the state of Connecticut. We need it in our rural areas, we need it in our urban areas, and we need it in our suburbs. It's an affordability, accessibility, and a diverse mix of housing. But high-density A30-G, bypassing and overstepping local municipal zoning is not the solution. It's over 31 years old, this bill, and it's caught so much emotion. You know, A30-G, I joke in Hartford, is a 4-letter word. And it's not a good thing, right? So we have to find solutions. But the real problem is, Bethel is not New York City. It's not Boston. We're trying to replicate something that isn't Bethel. So the best way you can find solutions is to work with local planning and zoning and authorities. And these laws and the mission and the focus is, they don't trust, the advocates of this, do not trust municipal leaders. They do not believe that you have the right vision. That's what it is. It is a state mandate of one size fits all. It doesn't give you the opt-in or the opt-out. It says if you choose not to do it, we're going to punish you. And that to me is onerous and patently un-American.
I'm going to ask a quick question, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. It just reminded me of something. So one of my worries is what will compel someone to move to a place like Bethel when it becomes Anytown USA? Because that's what this seems to be going towards, is Anytown USA. Like, they're all going to look, they're going to lose that, you know, whatever you call unique charm that it had, and it's going to become something, like morph into something that's almost like homogenous. I'm just curious of what you think about that.
If I could address that, you know, this is the truth, because we've all seen it. People don't like change. And people say, I love my town the way it is. You know what? I love Richfield. I've been there 32 years.
I didn't say that about
Okay.
loving it the way it is. I'm not wanting change. I'm all for affordable housing. It just seems like it's going towards
Well,
something
okay.
that's going to.
So this is the point I'm trying to get to. So we all want to keep what we like about it, but change is inevitable. Change is going to come. There will be more people. There will be more business. There will be more cars. Whatever. So the question isn't, are we going to change? The question is, how are we going to change? And back in the late 80s, the state, and I'm not going to put myself in their heads there, but they said, we need to effect a change that provides for housing at the local level. And the towns were saying, fine, build it at the local level, but not in our locality, because our locality is different. So that's when the state said, okay, we're going to hit you with the hammer of A30-G. And I agree, it's a hammer, and it's pretty uncomfortable. But if towns aren't willing to address the need for housing that even Senator Wong acknowledges, how are we going to build it? Well, the state says we have the power of mandates. None of us loves mandates, but we have to find a solution. We can't just say it's not our problem.
Can I answer
Yes.
a little bit on that? You know, when we were in the hearings, we would hear some of the legislators say, and you're from X town, and how much do you have affordable? And so it made us really take a look closely, and we just were working on creating a white paper to explain what those 4 categories are of A30-G. And when we drilled down on it, so there's 4 categories. The first one is government assisted. So that's when you develop it yourself, right? The second one is tenant rental assistance. That's like the rental assistance voucher, Section 8. The third column is CHAFA and USDA loans, which, again, town doesn't have a control over whether someone who's a resident of your town decides to partake in a CHAFA or a USDA loan. You would need farmland to have a USDA loan, and CHAFA in some parts of the state, like Lower Fairfield County, it excludes a lot of properties because the cost is so high of land there. So a lot of them can't avail themselves of that column, right? And then the third one is fourth one is deed restricted. That's sort of A30-G, inclusionary. Any of those sort of things would hit in that column. But those go away after 40 years. So, right now, generally speaking, that's what we see, is like if you have something that's deed restricted, that's generally what but it's been 30 years in the past, it's been a 20-year deed restricted, but I think that's part of what's causing an issue now, because down the road, that is going to start going away. So I think there's going to be 5,000 units of affordable that are going to sunset to market value in the next 5 years. So, and then it escalates from there. So I think we've created a situation by making a law that does inclusionary, that says, okay, only do 30% affordable. So I'll give you something that we've done in New Canaan. So in New Canaan, we've been trying to be very focused on trying to protect ourselves from A30-G and get a moratorium. So what we've been doing is trying to build 100% affordable, because then you're not increasing your denominator. Your numerator's going up and your denominator's it's not running away from you, like when you have a 10% inclusionary or any of these other bills that are 10 or 20%, you're never going to get to your 10% number, right? Which is a threshold, I get it, everybody says that as an excuse. So, so the problem is that, we tried to build it in 2018, and the government was going to give us some funding for it and then took it away, because they put the state on a debt diet. So then it took us another year to get funding from the federal government, and then COVID hit. And then, so like the project that was shovel-ready in 2018 didn't come online until partially in 2022, and the rest of it, 100 units of 100% affordable housing. So it took that long to get it done. And that was just 100 units, right? So here's the problem. The problem is you've got, as you look at these numbers and you consider that there's right now only 29 towns that have 10% according to that threshold. If you look at the ones that are on that list, a lot of them get money from the state's coffers to create their 100% to create their affordable. We're not getting that money. A lot of them have vouchers. Hartford gets 10,000 vouchers. New Haven gets 7,500. That all counts toward their percentage of affordable. Those things are not available to the rest of normal towns. I would say, like whatever. We don't get access to any of that. So here's the problem: is we're being scolded and chastised for not having this 10% when it's really stacked debt. It's stacked against us. It has been from the beginning. If you look back in 2002, there were not. There were only 31 towns that had affordable. Now we're at 29. So this is part of the problem, is we're not having these honest discussions about this. And I would challenge the state, and I did in my testimony. I said, help towns that are trying to do 100% affordable. The carrot for us is to say, we want relief from A30-G. So help us by helping us get that seed money to create that affordable, that it helps us get people who want to live in our town, who can't afford to otherwise live in our town, and help us create that housing. And then we get to our moratorium and you get the affordable that you need. And I think that's what collaboration looks like, and that's what we've been missing. And that's what we need.
The interesting point to your point, because I actually had written some of this down, as far as Bethel goes, 25% of Bethel's housing is multifamily. 75% of it is single family, residential. I've heard double R10 a lot these past 8 months. Yeah, that's single family residential zoning.
It's actually two family.
Two family, single family and two family, yeah, exactly. So the problem though is that to do the affordable housing, to be able to bring in more of the units, to be able to hit our mark, we need multifamily units. Where are you going to put that in Bethel? There's only specific places in the town that you can do that. So Stony Hill, down TOB.
There is another way, and what do you think of this? What could be put in the bill to have accessory apartments? We're two family. I could build an accessory unit, could rent it for, whatever the agreeable amount is. So Why wouldn't that be something to count towards the quota?
That's the remarkable frustration, when people say you don't have the percentage, the 10% of affordable housing under A30-G. Accessory dwelling units don't count.
I know they
All
don't,
right,
and that's why I want to know.
the two family homes that you're building don't count unless they're deed restricted. And that's important, because if you're looking at a median income in some of the various communities and pockets in this community, it may be at median income or below, but it doesn't count. In the eyes of the law and the state, that's not affordable housing.
That might be a middle median.
And we talked about changing the definition to be able to create stock that is truly affordable and accessible, but not the designation. Any builder you talk to do not want to restrict their homes or their properties for 40 years under a deed restriction. That's the challenge. And unfortunately, that was the way the law was written.
Okay, so quickly, I want to get to the other.
Sure, what you're talking about is housing that's called NOAA, Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing, and it's true. The 8-30, 80% rate is very close to market rate in many municipalities. The difference is, the big difference is, that if it's not restricted in some way, then there's no qualification on who can live there, right? So you might have a, let's say, a one-bedroom apartment going for $1,000. But if there's, and that certainly would be within the 8-30G definition of affordable. However, if the person living there is making $150,000, it can't be counted as affordable. And that's, is that clear?
Yeah, it's clear,
Okay.
but that could be in the bill too.
Well, there is actually a kind of solution, and I checked with the Department of Housing to find out if this is kosher. And what you could do is you can deed restrict something or create a covenant that deed restricts something until you transfer the property.
Sounds good to me.
I don't know why we don't do that, but that's the kind of workable creative solution.
That's the middle ground that we're seeking. Kenny, kind of stand up and then Phil.
Kenny Parsons, I'm on the zoning board here. I was born in this town. I've seen a lot of changes that you were talking about. There used to be trolley tracks down in the center of town when I was a kid. So things have changed a lot. But the affordable thing is such an adversarial project. Every time a project comes in, it's like a full-scale battle. And we have almost no tools to regulate it. And we bent over backwards to allow affordable in Bethel. We passed virtually everything. And we had I think 7 meetings before they got the message that it needs to be reduced a little bit. But it's just so adversarial that it's so difficult to have some sort of middle ground. And there's very few places left in Bethel to do affordable housing. But if we keep going in this direction, it's going to get even more adversarial. We need to have a little bit more saner middle ground so that we can work with the builders and not have to fight with them.
Phil.
Can I?
Yeah?
Would you comments? You know, I think that these proposals, there's often unforeseen consequences. And we have a good example right here in Bethel, and where the opposite actually happened when the goal was, I suppose, affordable housing. A few years back, I don't know how many people remember it, Worcester Street here in Bethel, less than a mile from here, was industrially zoned for factories and shops and whatnot. Well, the Planning and Zoning Commission thought it'd be a good idea to change the zoning designation to 2-acre residential. And one of the local builders who's gone to his reward, I won't mention his name, saw an opportunity, so he approached the state commission, whichever is in charge, and got it designated 8¼ acre zoning and a certain percentage with affordable housing, because that's how it worked. And the buildings he put up, I won't say are shabby, but that's how, what happened was, it opened up the whole mountain And we now have a development up there, it's called the Summit. I don't know how many people have been at the top of the Summit. It's like Brigadoon. It's a couple of hundred, what do you call them? Townhouses selling for $500,000-$600,000. And the people who bought them really set their own taxes because they griped a year later after they bought them because there was nothing like that before in Bethel. And their taxes were based on the money they paid, you know, because there was no other compatible variable size. So that was, you know, dwarfed anything else that happened in town here. But it's just, if you haven't been there, go up there. It's a wonderful place, but it never would have been created if there hadn't been for the affordable housing statute, which one of the local developers used when the zoning was changed. That's one other story from long ago. I was a school teacher, retired in Brewster. And in the late 70s, I was standing on lunch duty one day, and I'm monitoring, seeing the kids are eating their food and whatnot. And they were all well behaved in Brewster, I have to say. But I saw a young lad standing off to the side all by himself. So he looked kind of lonesome and fit in. I hadn't seen him before, so I started talking to him. And I noticed he had a Boston accent, real South Boston accent. So I talked to him about it, and he said, I said, what are you doing down here in Brewster? Oh, he says, my parents sent me down here, live with my aunt and uncle. And then I read up about it. Within 5 years of that decision by Judge Garrity, I think it was, the city of Boston, our goal was desegregation. Within 5 years, the city of Boston school system went from 70% Caucasian to less than 25%. It's never gone back. That's a mammoth, unforeseen consequence. So these things have to happen, you know, and I don't know what the result of all these things are, but people don't think about those things. Things happen that are, you know, you can't predict them. But we don't have to go far in Bethel. We have Brigadoon up here on the top of the mountain, and it was a result of affordable housing statute, and it's certainly not affordable housing.
Does anybody have a question from the audience? Yes, sir.
Actually, I have a couple of comments. So my name is John. First of all, I appreciate all the comments on this panel tonight. They've been very informative. Thank you for coming up with Canaan, desegregate Connecticut, Allison, and
No,
particularly.
he's not desegregate, just so you know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. He's the chair of the Richmond Affordable Housing.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Right, so, and our state senator, thank you very much for being here. A couple of things that the comments made tonight. One is, when we were doing the research on where Bethel sits in affordable housing, first of all, Bethel was the fastest growing town in Fairfield County over the last 10 years. Phenomenal growth, and we've talked about what's happened to our school system, our roads, our infrastructure, and so forth. But if you look at the numbers, we started when A30-G came out at 6.4%. Because of the growth and because of the limits of affordable housing, we currently have gone backwards in that entire 20-year period. We're at 6.1%. We went backwards. And we put in all of this housing, including a fair amount of affordable, but we've gone backwards. So it really hasn't. The more we build, the further we fall in the whole process. If there's something wrong with this, how we do this, if you talk about something in Canaan where it's 100%, then that would make sense. But no matter what we do, we're going to keep going backwards. And that's what happened. So over 20 years, we went backwards. And yet we grew the fastest in Fairfield County. It's a pretty interesting number. The second thing, talking to Billy Michael's point, because I used to take the train into New York City from Bethel and worked in New York City. It is a terrible route. Terrible. People talk about transit-oriented districts. It's just, I would never do that. It's the worst punishment I could ever get. It's $5,000, by the way, for the ticket a year. It costs $200 to park there. And by the way, people don't walk to the train station. They park their cars there. The other part is, we recently got numbers from the state of Connecticut on the transit district here in the town of Bethel. Does anyone know what percentage people actually take it today of the population? It's 1%. 1% of this entire town utilizes that train station. So we're saying we want a transit-oriented district, and we're going to disrupt the entire town, build everything around it, when no one takes the train. Forgetting the buses, which I agree with, they're empty, because I sit on Greenwood Avenue, they go by my house all day long. I'm right on the main line. My wife and I walk through town, we walk by the train station every day. They double the parking lot, things have changed, and it's about 1/3 full of her life. Okay with that. The last thing about this comment from the woman at the end, the Tax Institute, I just read a report on the Tax Institute. So it ranks Connecticut as number 50 as far as business friendliness. When you run through all the taxes, what the businesses pay, so forth. So to say that residential housing are going to solve this problem, A30-G is going to solve the problem. It's not going to happen. This is the worst state ranked in the entire United States. It's number 50 as far as business affordability. Business to be here, to operate here, and operate in the state. So, like you say, if there's 3 points, we first start with jobs. That's why we don't have them. Because they leave the state. Because it makes no sense. There's a reason why people are going to Florida and Texas and they just flew out of the state, okay? We did get some immigration, thank you, because of COVID. But the final point is, I'd say, is one size fits all. That's crazy. Because that's the reason why we have democracy. It's good people making local choices. And I used to be on planning and zoning for years. I appreciate Kenny, and I agree, we've been to some of these meetings. It just basically take a state law and say, every single town in Connecticut fits the same thing, to me is crazy. Because when they ask the people for the master plan, what is the thing you want in the master plan? The number one thing is to maintain the character of the town. That's why they moved here. That's the number one reason why they moved into this town, was they wanted to maintain the character of the town. I grew up here. I have a 1760 colonial house. It's a maintenance nightmare. A total maintenance nightmare. We love it. My wife's very patient. She works in all the yard and garden and so forth. And you know what's going to happen to us? If what happens in the bottom, right at the bottom of our hill, we're supposed to have 200 units. And you know what the main true street is? Right over the top of our hill, right into that project. As far as the colonial house, next thing you know, the guy across the street, I'm going to have high-rise apartments next to me. I thought it was an asset. It's a 1760 colonial. But I'm beginning to wonder if it is an asset in town, or if the town even cares anymore. I find it Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for all the comments.
Yes. That'd be amazing.
I'm thrilled to follow your comments. The 6.5 to 6.1, we talk about it a lot, that increasing density increases the population. It's like a dog chasing its tail. It's never going to catch it. Number 2, God bless you commuting from Bethel to New York City, right? Which shows that you love, obviously you love your 1,700-year-old house,
Right?
or your wife does, but you love this town. That's why you stay here, right? People do what they need to do. But as Allison said, our transit-oriented culture has changed. And I think it's forever changed. People are commuting less. They're working from their home and Zoom. I don't think it'll ever get back. But we still need a transit system, but not at the capacity that TOD, Work, Live, and Ride is offering. The third is in regards to 1% ridership. That's just not effective, is it? We're chasing after, the advocates are creating a dream that you're chasing after, and they're forcing you to live that dream, rather than listening to the people. The fourth thing is taxes. We talk about business and jobs. Look, we need to increase our tax base, right? But we tax too much, and we lose opportunities. Look, I have a 24-year-old and 28-year-old. If they tell me that their dream is to live in Richfield or Fairfield or Bethel at 24 years old, I would have their heads checked, right? My daughter's in the city, the kids want to. So when we talk about workforce development, we need to create jobs. Even when we talked about, Maria said, ASML, one of the fastest growing companies in the country. They're hiring like crazy. But they're saying it's all rentals. We're building nothing that gives people a sense of ownership and roots in the community. It's a transient population. So the reality is, great great ideas, wonderful concept, but they're advocated by tons of people. Have we asked for the people that we're trying to build a housing for? When I talk about increased needs in our urban and rural areas, why are we not doing the job in supporting them? The people we're trying to create affordability and accessibility move in from Danbury or Waterbury or Hartford or Bridgeport into our suburban communities. Has anybody ever asked them? Do they want to stay in their own community, build safer schools, safer neighborhoods, have a sense of community? Has anybody asked those communities? Are we not doing a better job instead of just picking on suburbs, building up density, and saying that you're social equity lacking, that you're racial inequality? Has anybody asked for the advocates of those communities to say, how about building you better schools in your communities? How about safer streets and a broader sense of community? Unfortunately, we, again, advocates, take the attitude, we know what's better for you, rather than going right to the people. And I think it's been fantastic that we finally reopened up the Capitol where people had a chance to voice some concerns. I know Cynthia was a glutton for punishment. She stayed up with us till about 12:30 a.m. for the public hearing. But I also want to tell you that the Council on Government, and we got to put out an APB on Francis Pickering, right? The organizations that represent the 168 towns, one town chose not to be on CCM, and COST, the Council on Small Governments, Small Towns, all came out against this bill. There's some real consideration, and you know what? Despite all those objections, they voted out along party lines. There wasn't any objection. That's just the frustration of party politics not listening to the needs of the people. And that's what's horrible of why people hate politics. They don't listen to the people's needs and wants. They think they're better than everybody else. Sorry.
And you could probably answer this question because you work so closely with affordable housing. Is there an ideology that is based in like desegregated Connecticut that it's an opportunity for more diversity? Is that one of the goals?
Well, I am not part of Desegregate
I know you're not.
Connecticut. I can't speak for Desegregate Connecticut, but having been a student of housing policy over time, when zoning was introduced, there were some very specific decisions made, whether they were done intentionally or not, that have resulted in a situation where we have concentrated wealth and concentrated poverty in Connecticut. Now, you might say that's fine, poor people want to live together, but I guarantee you, if you go and you ask poor people who live in an area where the housing is substandard, do they want to be where they are? The answer is probably not. They would probably want to live in better housing. And when it comes to transportation, there is a man who I used to see walking from the corner of Route 35 and Route 7 down to Stop and Shop where he worked every day because the bus would not come into Richfield. And people would see him walking, and occasionally someone would stop and give him a ride. Would he like to live closer to where he worked? Maybe he would like to work closer to where he lived, but there's a problem that's not being addressed. Recently, the state decided to introduce this bus going through Richfield. And you know what I hear from Richfielders? We don't want it. It's going to turn the town into a city. But the fact is, the people who work in your hair salons, who work in your supermarkets, who wait your tables, they cannot afford to live in a lot of the towns that we call home. And unless we solve this problem, business people are going to continue having problems hiring people, so you're going to have trouble, you're going to have to wait longer for your burger. Everything, what I'm trying to say, everything is connected here. It's not just about housing, it's not just about transportation.
I think what Tony was saying was, and then Maria has something, say, why not invest more in the environments that they're trying to escape and regentrify or do something that improves the quality of what already exists instead
The state does.
of, okay. Okay, and what capacity, I'm just curious, because that was a point, that was a good point.
But the state also, and I'm not speaking for the state, in particular, but there is a need for all kinds of housing across all areas of the state, as the senator pointed out. To further concentrate poverty or to fail to address the concentration of poverty, we have to address that.
I think there's also a stigma that comes with affordable housing in some of our wealthy communities. I mean, let's just be completely transparent, like you just said, like there, people in Ridgefield are like, we don't want the bus to come through because who's gonna bring? And I think there is a sense of if something's affordable, it must not be good, right? And so let's just say there still is a racism issue in our country and in our state. And so that label on affordable is there. And so a wealthy community that, can opt out and not take the funds or whatnot, Bethel might be not there, right? And so, again, I think that there is a stigma and a label associated with affordable. And so people are like, I don't want that in my backyard. And that is a reality, unfortunately, in the society and system that we're in. So people hear that and they think, I don't want that because that's not good enough. That's not good enough for my home. Whereas that has to flip. Otherwise, you're never going to get anywhere because, again, we don't live in silos. The people that are serving us, our Starbucks in downtown Ridgefield, coming and living somewhere else because you might not be able to afford to live there. But there is a stigma and a label placed on affordable. There just is.
I would say to that, I mean, New Canaan, which is a more expensive community, right? So, but I think about Greenwich, I think about Westport, I think about New Canaan. We've all, in our own way, come up with some innovative ways because, to your point, like we are trying to create that affordable because it is challenging. It's very challenging when the property land cost is so high to make it affordable. We do have some naturally affordable even in our communities. Every town has a naturally affordable element of it. And so I think it's important that people recognize, because we hear it a lot, we get a lot of darts thrown at us, and people say, oh, you're not trying. Well, we were in one moratorium, we technically have the state not, we're still arguing with the state over getting our second moratorium. We technically should be in our second moratorium working toward our third. So that's meant to say, we're trying, we're really working on it and working on in an earnest way to develop more and more affordable. The one thing I want to go back to your point about transit development, at like that one in the morning market, like on March 15th, I guess it was, Margarita Albin spoke, and she is P&Z from Greenwich. And that's part of my frustration is listening to some of these great people who are in Westport, who are real thinkers who are working on and trying to solve for these issues and how do we best tackle them. And my frustration is after 3 years of literally working as 169 strong and hearing all of these testimony and that it's not internalized by the legislators, and I'm not talking about Tony. So that's the frustration, is that the majority party is not embracing those workable ideas and they've come to them. And one of the things that Margarita said, and that's to my point here, is that she said, transit development may be yesterday's thinking. She said that, when you think about where, even in Greenwich, it's the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday commuters, a lot of them are staying home on the shoulder, on the weekend, on the Mondays and the Fridays. So it's changing the role of it. So you want walkable communities, but maybe it's not centered necessarily on transit per se, but rather within your downtown or wherever where you want to have more of a walkable community. And your point, I did circle that number when you said about that you guys have over 20%. Yeah, you guys have 24.6% multifamily. New Canaan has 15%, and people would not think that, but we do. We have a lot of multifamily. So that's the point, is that a lot of communities already have been doing that and have a good mix of different types of housing. It's just not always affordable, unfortunately. And then the other thing to talk about is affordability overall. So we know that this has been focused entirely on housing. One of the interesting studies that I had seen was in U.S. News, which talked about overall affordability. And when you look at overall affordability, Connecticut's 46 out of 50, not great. And that's because we have a death by 1,000 taxes and user fees and everything else that they're, licensing fees and everything else, and especially small businesses. I hear that all the time, that small businesses are really impacted by these things. So when you look then at and compare that to your housing cost, it was 19 out of 50, not as bad. And again, that goes back to the fact that we have different markets in our state where if you're closer to New York, it's more competitive market. It's a still higher cost because we still have the demand because of our proximity to the economic engine of New York. However, Hartford, New Haven, lagging. Back to your point about the fact that we need businesses. We need an environment where businesses want to come and start here, and we need to start finding a way back to that. And that, until our legislators and the majority party start doing that, you're not going to see. That's the only true way to create affordability and sustainability, is by creating good jobs with good salaries that make your life more affordable then. And that's what I'm hoping at some point someone wakes up and thinks about these things.
I get some questions. We had a question first, and then Tim.
Yeah, and that's Chopper. I just wanted to make a comment on Allison's thing about affordable housing. I find, talking to many people, they do not understand the true definition of affordable housing. They think it's low-income housing, and that's why you see a lot of pushback, because I don't want low-income housing. And they don't, I don't know how you get that proper definition out to people, because a lot of people are busy with their kids, their job or whatever. They don't spend a lot of time listening to, politics or what's happening around. But if they do get drawn into a conversation, there's so many times when John will tell you too, they think affordable is low income. So
We've been working on workforce housing, as I said in my intro, accessible, diverse, and that's why I said in the beginning, when you begin the moniker desegregate, that sends a tone of inflammatory, and then the counterpoint is NIMBYs, right? People want to protect their homes, but that's where I began. The emotionality is just a natural kind of friction that occurs. We got to de-escalate, but the reality is you don't de-escalate when the state's telling you what to do, and if you don't do it, I'm going to take a stick to you. That doesn't do anything to open up channels of communications, right? And that's the frustration we have, is the towns are willing to do it. Inclusionary zones, accessory dwelling units, creativity and transit-oriented that fits. Communities are trying to do it, all right? Work with us. The governor did make $200 million as a commitment in regards to that. I'm working very actively on bonding and initiations to be able to create kind of models where state, federal, and local entities create truly accessible, diverse, and respectful of the community housing. That's the way to go, not a stick. And I want to follow up on Dave when he says progress is inevitable. I got to be honest with you. That isn't always the best answer.
He said change.
That's not what I said.
Change, all right, change. I studied and saw what Robert Moses did in the Cross Bronx in destroying communities and neighborhoods, never to be replicated. And when you say you're a student of housing, I gotta be honest, there's so many housing advocates that are students of housing. But let me share with you, I'm a first-generation immigrant, spent 2.5 years in a housing project. Parents, and lived in an urban setting where we had to have gated windows. But you know what? I had a community. I had people that cared. I had parents that were involved. I had teachers that cared. There was a sense of community. So when we're trying to create opportunities for people and pursue the American dream, housing is fundamental, but it doesn't need to be in a suburb. It needs to be in a community where people care about each other, where kids can grow up, go to school, have the best education, and feel safe. It doesn't need to be in Bethel, Darien, or Greenwich. It can be in Bridgeport. It can be in Stamford. It can be in Hartford. Why are we not looking at a broad scope? Why are we not? And I began my conversation. I've been doing this for 6 years. Here's reality. We need housing in every aspect of our state. Why are we passing legislation that targets and says, you're bad actors?
Well, I think historically, many of the towns have been bad actors. And it wasn't until 8-30G with all its flaws that many towns began to fit. But let me give an example of a problem that could be solved at the state, and this baffles me, Senator. So we have 8-30G, which requires you hit the 10% threshold in order to be exempt. And then we have 8-30J, which says every 5 years you have to come up with an affordable housing plan. And I looked at Bethel's, and it's pretty good. I thought, this is pretty good. There's absolutely no connection between the two. So here you have a town that's thinking of ways to address this problem that you've even identified, and yet there's no penalty for not doing anything. We come back to 8-30G, it's all stick and no carrot. Why can't towns develop their own plans, pursue them, and showing some progress, receive a moratorium, gain some exemption from 8-30G?
I agree with you. I actually was the architect of that bill that changed 830G, but it was sunsetted, and then it sunsetted this year. We changed the formula. The current formula 830G gives you a half point for elders, for senior living. We changed that formula to accommodate, but it sunsetted. But one of the things we agreed in a bipartisan basis was, in order to facilitate implementing a plan, you have to have one. So we requested a 5-year for our municipalities to implement a plan. You need to begin the process. 30, 40, 50 years ago, was there exclusionary and redlining? Absolutely. And you know what? I will say this. You cannot go back to this in 2023 and continue to use it for our inability to create housing. There are other economic factors. I will tell you, anybody who redlines or discriminates in this day and age, in any town, will be called out and they will be prosecuted. So when we talk about exclusionary, racist attitudes and exclusionary practices, sure, do they exist in the minds and hearts of people? No doubt. But I dare anyone to use that as a reason to deny anybody who wants to move into a community. Because I'll be the first one to call them out. Because as an individual, I have been subject 35 years ago to redlining. But you know what? I stepped up and I'm part of the solution, I hope. But the fact is, but you cannot think you know better than the local leaders that have been elected and accountable to the people. And that's the problem I have with Hartford's attitude right now in regards to housing. They think they know better than the people who have been elected and represent the people in the town. That's the problem.
I am a local leader.
Just a second. Yeah, we have some questions. I want to see if they might.
Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, it was Tim next.
Tim.
Okay.
I know the order in my mind, so.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up on things that John was saying. And Ken, I've only lived here 40 years, and I still feel like a newcomer. But I've been here long enough to know Rayana Schmucker, and was glad to have you as a friend for many years. But John's spoke a word as remote character. Last year, Desegregated Connecticut got a bill through that prohibits planning and zoning boards from using character
of the neighborhood or the area as a reason for turning or making a land use decision. You can't do that anymore. And it doesn't, and it's just flat out. So if someone wanted to do something industrial in a neighborhood, you can no longer say, it's not just limited to housing, it's anything. So if someone wanted to do an industrial development, maybe you can't say, you know, your character, that's a problem. So they got that through.
There's no questions, if there's no questions.
So there, but to go beyond that, we've talked about, you know, the numerator and denominator. So my background is I got a master's in urban planning. For 33 years, I was the community development director for the city of Stanford. And back in the late 80s, I saw Stanford's growth coming. I said, you know, we're the 6th largest city in the state. Within 20 years, we're going to be moving up to the 3rd or 2nd, only because we were growing so quickly and the other cities were losing population. So we were kind of moving up very quickly. And we were at about 13% affordable by the A30-G formula. And we didn't care what other towns were doing. And we just didn't want A30-G to apply to us. And so around the year 2000, we changed our zoning to do two things. We increased densities, and when you increase density, you're giving the landowners a windfall. It's a windfall. So at the same time we gave them a windfall, we said, and if you develop more than 10 units, 20% have to be affordable. So then you're taking it back at the same time. And we just felt we had to do that, otherwise we were going to continue to lose. With all the development, we were going to continue to lose our percentage, and we'd then be subject to A30-G. And we didn't want to lose control of our local zoning, just as small towns, like my town of Bethel, where I live, and I was taking the train every day, and I love taking the train. Yeah, to Stanford anyway. The next leg you can have. But, so anyway, but I want to talk about, you know, zoning is they call it a police power. The state has the police power, and you're supposed to use it for a purpose, for public safety, health, and welfare. 830G, the public purpose is affordable housing, and that is a legitimate public purpose. However, as Maria pointed out, only 30% have to be affordable. So what ends up happening is developers are enriching themselves through 830G by busting zoning and building a lot of units. And for the price of doing 30% affordable, they get a big bump in their market rate number of units. And the other problem we run into with the TOD is that the areas, you just draw a circle, you're ignoring what's inside that circle. Around in New England, in Connecticut, around the train station are a lot of historic houses. And when you increase densities, you're going to lose that housing. They're coming down. And so I did a little example here. So let's say a developer acquires 2 homes that are on a half acre of land, but they're in the R10 zone, the quarter-acre zone. So as of right, they could build 4 units. But let's say the developer comes in, acquires that land and says, oh, under 830G, I'm going to propose building 30 units. 30 units to an acre is something that's possible, right? So, but as a condition of doing 30 units, they have to do 9 affordable. So they have 4 units were as of right, allowed by zoning. Add another 9, that would be the 13. And that's a public purpose right there, okay? You've got the public purpose. But under this proposal, they get an extra 17 units of market rate units. And there's no public purpose in busting zoning to allow market rate housing. The private sector should take care of that. And if you want to build more, do it according to zoning. So I would love to see the Desegregate Connecticut and the legislatures, legislators who feel so strongly about affordable housing to change A30G to say that you can build as of right, whatever you have, and for every unit over and above as of right housing, it has to be affordable, and that's it. And you're not getting this big bump of market rate housing. And I know nonprofit developers will do that all day long, but the for-profit developers, they're not gonna wanna do that, because they want the market rate. And the private developers are going to come up and testify before the housing committee saying, yeah, we're in favor of this 100% thing. It's up to the desegregated Connecticut people, the other housing advocates, and even the true housing advocates in the legislature to come up with this. And would you be against requiring 100% affordability? Well, you can't, I mean.
Yes, you can.
Well, you can require it, but it makes no economic sense. The market is not, we know this, the market is not in and of itself going to build affordable. They're going to go.
Nonprofits do it every year.
Right, but they're doing it based on subsidies that they receive from the government. So it's not truly market in that sense. And it's funny because
So you're giving away density to a developer. You're imposing it on the town, but the benefit is only 30%.
A30-G is not market
Well,
either.
here's an example,
No,
this is
no.
a real, that's an example. Right over at First Street came in with a proposal for 30 units, no affordable housing, 30 units. It was 3 stories in this little neighborhood of 1 to 2 families. The planning and zoning, because of it didn't fit in with the neighborhood at all, they declined it. The developer just said, he goes, well, I'm just gonna come back with A30G. Now there's something for 42 units in this tiny neighborhood, and it's probably gonna get passed, because it's A30G. Now, there's something wrong with that. If you could take the TOD and say affordable housing, and have that be, sanctioned by the state, perhaps even helped along financially in some way, because guys are spending all this money trying to, pass all these bills.
Then you're only gonna get 14 units.
Right, would you be opposed to that? And I think you have one.
would I be opposed specifically?
To what Tim just said about affordable,
Well, as I was saying, the market will not build 100% affordable.
And that's what the developers are telling you.
right, and I'm
But
proud.
The developers
they-
fund desegregated Connecticut. The developers fund the legislators who are voting on this.
That is true.
What are they gonna do? And of course, so you're just saying, oh, it's not possible. So, oh, okay, yeah, right.
But I think that, to the point of, your point with, so I live in the TOD, right? And I live on a 1/4 acre lot. And this is something I've thought about a lot lately, because what's to say a homeowner, and I have a cute little softbox cape, it's not a 1750s colonial, but, 1950s soon. So what's to say a property owner couldn't just tear that, let me tear this down, and that's where I get a little nervous about living in a community with single-family homes around a train station, a lot of character. We do have a lot of flexibility with our TOD regulations in our town. And I really give our planning and zoning a lot of credit for saying, no, this project does not fit this. It might be in TOD, but the underlying zoning, it does not fit. But my fear is, as we do need housing, and we do have developers who want to, make money, it's a capitalist society, that property owner has every right to tear down their house and say, I'm gonna build the max density that I can. So here it's 30 units for an acre of land. So if I'm on a 1/4 of an acre, then I'm at 7-ish units, okay, but you're not gonna let me build it, so I'm gonna come and I'm gonna say A30G, so you're gonna get maybe 2 units, and then the rest I'm gonna do. I can see that kind of happening as a domino effect until a town like ours, which does need housing, can get their arms around how are we going to meet those thresholds so we're not going backwards, to John's point, from 6.5 to 6.1%. So that idea of a pause, your toddler's having a temper tantrum, we need to stop and figure this out, it makes sense, but we're afraid to because we're afraid because, well, there goes the money, there goes the taxes, there goes, but on the flip side, well, that might be 2 or 3 less kids in the schools that we're supporting, or we promised them that sidewalk, because there's no sidewalks in my neighborhood. But I guess that is that middle ground of like, how do we get there, right? How do we figure this out on a state level, on a local, municipal level? Because a lot of residents and neighbors are just, they're fed up, right? A lot of them can't afford to live there. If I was to try to buy my house now, I wouldn't be able to. So again, we're in a situation, and that has to be figured out.
I just want to get there, and there's like 4 people who want to, and I don't know if you want to ask questions or comments, but they're here, and let's use them. You were next, and then Mark.
Okay. So, Bill Oakes, I'm a lifelong resident of Bethel. My family's been here for over 100 years. I actually sold my house 3 weeks ago. I raised the white flag because TOD, all these rules from Hartford have crushed this town. It's destroyed this town. This town is not the town I grew up in. I don't know what it is anymore. Everything is out of control. Taxes are out of control. The buildings that they're putting up every 2 feet. The schools want millions of dollars. So it all comes from the top, right? So Hartford is pushing all these mandates down. You gotta do this, you gotta do this. The problem is, we can sit here and talk for hours. Absolutely nothing's gonna change. Even though I think a lot of us want it to change, it's done. This has been put in play 20 years ago. And what's happening now is you're feeling the effect of it now when my taxes were $4 grand and I sold and they're 10, right? It's crazy. You can't afford to live here anymore. Those days are gone. You need to make $150,000 as a family unit to live, right? So the people like you're talking about, Richfield or whatever, you guys held off this stuff forever because Rudy had a moratorium in town. I can't imagine how much money he used to fight the building. So let's be realistic about how that happens, So Bethel can't say no because of all the 803-G, the TOD. The TOD is garbage. We should get rid of it. It was horrible. Matt Knickerbocker should have never done it. It just destroyed this town. So we need to go back, peel back 15 years of garbage stuff that's happened in this town and start over and try to figure out how do we save this town? Because I went through the schools here, my kids are going through the schools here. They're never going to be able to afford a $500,000 house. That's all that wants to be built now. Okay? You can't afford, the $100,000 house on Bethpage is gone. Those are gone. They will never be built here in Bethel again. And that's what you're talking about, affordable type housing in a community, right, Tony? I grew up, everybody was an aunt or an uncle in my town. You just walked over there, you went here, you got that. That's gone. That doesn't happen anymore. I have no idea who my neighbors are. No idea. People are more afraid of their neighbors now than they ever were. I could go in my neighbor's house, walk right in when I was a kid. So the community is gone. Mr. Gallagher, he left. He was here forever. So there are some faces in here that have been here for a long time. But there's all the new people, they come in, like you said, for a little bit of time. 5, 10 years till their kids are out of school. They sold from New York or wherever. They're getting a discount coming here. They're only paying 10 grand. They used to pay 25. But they want everything, right? Turf fields, lights, this, that, pool. We're in trouble. Little towns like Bethel are getting destroyed. I just wanted to come here and just let people know. That's what happens.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Doug Walker. I have not lived in Bethel for 4 years. My family did not come to Bethel. We moved here 2 years ago. Bounced around a lot. I'm originally from Canada. Nice to meet you. Look, the reason, when we're talking about like, oh, what do the people who live in the town want? Okay, the reason we moved to Bethel was, I got a job in Brewster, and we like drew a circle around it, and we'd be like, wow, it'd be wonderful to have a little town, where you could actually walk someplace. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, there's this town called Bethel, and I want to call it Richfield. And, okay, well, what's my salary going to be? Okay, well, Bethel it is. So I mean, so the walkability, the idea of the work-live ride aspect of it is actually the right idea. This is the part of the character of the town that I really like. I kind of have a question for Mr. St. Germain, because I no longer work in Bethel. I actually work very close by, but I see the empty buses go by. And I was like looking into taking the empty buses, but they go by, they're like once every 2 hours, right? And if you want to have public transit, it's got to be like 15 minutes or at some reasonable amount. I'd love to be able to ride my bicycle to,
Good luck.
yeah.
There are no bike lanes, and so.
There are no bike lanes. You know, we're lacking sidewalks.
Sidewalks. I run.
Yeah.
It's hard.
What do we gotta do, like, because I figured that, let's talk about the small things.
Yeah, the small things, I think that's a big thing. Like,
when you think about, I did not know, and I lived here in Texas, so I'm a newcomer, I'm only 18 years, but I did, in looking at the Bethel Forward plan, and like Jan and some of my neighbors have read it more cover to cover than I even had, we have to invest in that as a town, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we want a walkable town, then we need to have sidewalks to walk on. Part of the thing here in town that I know as a runner is who shovels and who doesn't. Luckily, we had no snow this winter, okay? No snow. But it's the property owner who has to maintain their sidewalk. So there are a lot of sidewalks on my side of town that aren't there anymore, that used to be there. I know when they were going down Wooster and Durant to, like, you know, there were people who were up in arms a couple months ago because they were like, I can't believe the town's going to come and take my 3 or 4 feet from my sidewalk. But if we want to have nice things like sidewalks, we need to be able to do that. But I think those are things that have to happen here locally, and Dan's nodding his head in the back. You know, we have a public works department.
Only there is someone involved in local government.
Right, so if we want a walkable town, we need sidewalks, and we need sidewalks that aren't buckling, things like that. You know, I give the people on Grand Street a lot of credit. There's a couple houses that really go for the character, and they've got the brick paver sidewalks. There was one house this past summer, one of the Victorians, and they redid their whole driveway. Some of you who live there may have seen it. I mean, the guys they laughed at me because I run every day. So like by the second week, they were like, are you gonna come by every day? And I'm like, I'm just checking your progress. But it's a homeowner who has to keep up their sidewalk. That homeowner is doing a nice brick paver. The guy next to him, I don't know, it's kind of tricky, you might trip. So again, that's just a local thing, that's a community thing. So if we really want to have a walkable town and accessibility to the train, the other thing about this, with the state, so if we're really putting in a lot of stuff on that end of town, we've got a state road with state lights, 2 state roads, because we've got 53 and 302. There is nothing Bethel can do about the light at Grassy Plain and Whitney or the light at the Sycamore. Those are state roads. There's nothing that Bethel can do. And if we're going to put more people in infrastructure, commercial, residential, anything in that end of town, we can't do anything because it's state road. So if I would like a left turn arrow, because it would make it easier for pedestrian walking, I mean, a town can't do that, the state has to do that. So, you know, there has to be some workability there. So give us the light. If you want us to have that development and building, because you want us to have some more housing, make it affordable, we need a left turn light.
And we need sidewalks.
And we need sidewalks. Or we need a crossing to the, you know, maybe a pedestrian bridge,
better yet, a car crossing at grade, further down, like along from the train station further down. But again, that's within 500 feet of this one right here. So there's a bunch of things that are in our master plan. Had they been done, we would have been poised for something that was built that could fit in a character in our community, but we're not, because it's not done. So if we can do that kind of stuff here locally, then you can build it. But then we're at the mercy of state road, I want my left-hand turn lane. I'd still like it even if I don't want the 3.
I am making notes.
I
got
don't
you.
want the 30-unit building, but I want my left turn
I
lane.
know, but we have people who really want to. It's Lexus and Mark.
Hi, Alexis Harrison. I'm from Fairfield. I live in Bethel. This is a lovely town. I wear 2 different hats. I'm part of CT 169 Strong, and I've also I've sat the past year and a half on my zoning commission in Fairfield. And I actually really got involved with CT 169 Strong was because there were a lot of bad, what we call bad bills from Hartford, but they also took away the voice of the people at zoning commissions. One of the best things that I see at zoning commissions is the democratic process. I see people, dozens of neighbors coming to go fight a dog kennel that they may not want in their neighborhood, but they want it. And that's the democratic process in its simplest form. And this desegregating bill actually gets rid of the public hearing process. And to me, that's very scary. I know zoning, we've talked about it a lot tonight, and zoning is about regulating land. It doesn't regulate people or races. It regulates land. So I think we just have to be very careful about how we talk about zoning. And zoning is more than just affordable housing, which I know is a vital need for all of our communities. No doubt about it. Actually, my town was one of the first towns in 1988 that crafted an affordability plan. So we've recognized that for many years. I would just say study the bills, look at them, talk to your lawmakers, and just be aware of what's in the fine print. I didn't do my due diligence until a few years ago, and I really woke up, I would say. So, and I also came to zoning. I was never hungry to serve on my zoning board, but I actually realized zoning serves as a mini EPA. We're one of the first stops when it comes to protecting our environment. And once we get rid of that, that's not good for our land. It's not good for where we live and climate change. So just think about this, and thank you again for the support.
Marty.
Good evening. I'm Marty Fonsello, currently the state representative in the 107th District, which is mostly Brookfield, but a part of Bethel and a part of Newtown. I'll also say that 20 years ago, I was the first selectman in Brookfield for 2 terms. So many of the things you're talking about here tonight, we talked about 20 years ago. And we went back and forth with Hartford then. Now I'm up there, only 2 months or so, right, Senator? For the past 2 months I've been up there, and I see what's going on, and I hope to bring a different perspective. I agree with much of what's been said, but so much has been said, I can't reply to everything here tonight. I do want to say, I do believe in the sovereignty of the towns. I don't like mandates of any kind. Mandates, Latin word, to command, right? And because of the mono in it, it was originally supposed to be get someone's assistance by shaking hands. But it's become this, the heavy fist, the dictate, which is what we don't want. So what do the people in the towns think? People in the towns think, who the heck does Hartford think they are? That they know better than the people in the towns? I say the people in the towns, the voters, right, know what they want their towns to look like, how they want them to progress. All right, if Hartford has a plan that says we want to set aside so many affordable houses or a percentage like this, tell the towns, don't order them to do it. Say it would be a good idea if you set aside whatever the number was, 10% or what have you. Let the towns decide. So whoever came up with the master plan at Hartford, let this thing run freely. Let the market flow on its own for a few years and see if it works or not. If it doesn't work, maybe you need to change the plan and the goals of the plan. Okay, so if in an individual town, somebody mentioned here before, okay, they would expect lower income people to move into the town. Okay, and who might they be? Well, you could say, I don't want to denigrate any specific profession, but a street sweeper. Okay, back when I was first selected, we were looking at young nurses, young teachers, cops, and firemen. Okay, so you could set aside some housing for that. Let the town decide. Let the market function. So if you were in any given town, I don't care how rich or poor, and we've heard a little bit of all across the spectrum here tonight, okay, if they say, you know, gee, there's nobody working at McDonald's anymore. There's nobody pouring my coffee at Starbucks. There's no one bagging groceries at the grocery store. If they decide that they don't like that, let the people on their own decide how they're going to shape their town to let people live there that can work in those jobs. Okay, this is not difficult, but we don't want to be dictators to what to do. So, and I know nobody is here really representing Hartford, but let's say, for example, the federal government, since they're the next highest up on the ladder, turns around and says, gee, we have a problem with affordable housing or whatever in the United States. So we, the other 49 states have voted, and you, Connecticut, are going to be the affordable housing state in the country. We're going to dictate to you, that's what you have to do. Tear down everything here, all your buildings. We want high-density affordable housing. It's ridiculous, I know. Okay? Would you like it if they did that? No. And the towns don't like it when the state says the same thing to them. So don't dictate to them. Make recommendations. That's all you can do. And I got a real kick out of the mass transit thing before. Transit without the mass. I'm going to remember that. But that's it. So I'm going to say, I want to see the towns decide how they are going to develop. And we need to go back to Hartford and come up with a better plan for how Connecticut is going to develop. The whole economic issue and what have you. We can do this without order. And people don't like to be told, you got to do this. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. If you have any questions, on the side. Thank you.
If there's any more questions, otherwise I'm going to wrap it up.
Yep.
Oh, for Selectmen, yes?
I'm taking my point of privilege for a moment.
Point of privilege.
I do not have a question, but I do have one quick statement. I want to thank the Independent Party of Bethel. I want to thank Bethel Action Committee for doing a forum in Bethel tonight. This was not a town-sanctioned event by any means. It was a group of people who saw something going wrong in our community, and they've come here. They put an excellent panel together. All you did a great job. Dave, I know you're the outman out of it a little bit. You did a fantastic job. And I think everybody really should be commended for what they did here tonight. We have a long struggle ahead with affordable housing. But, together, in fact, I want to learn more about 169 Strong because that is what will help us. We do not have the votes in Hartford to make those differences right now. Numbers are just against us. That's the truth. So if we can help you in your mission, I know I'm on board because my community needs the help. Thank you for what you've done.
Thank you.
I commend you, David, because, you were trying to be so balanced and you were such a gentleman and solid. I really appreciate it. You all.
Yeah, David.
What I heard tonight was common ground. There were a lot of things we actually agreed on. And I find a lot of optimism in that.
That's great. So what I'd like to do, each of you, if you would synopsize and just focus on what we accomplished in terms of middle ground, that would be great.
I'll start with Tony.
Okay, but I never end. We start with
No, I think getting engaged, having your voices be heard, read House Bill 6890, which is the transit-oriented desegregate bill, which is on the front burner. Fair share came out of housing, but you're welcome to follow up and make any of your inquiries and your thoughts to me. It's Senator Huang, hwang.com. Thank you to all of you for being here tonight, and thank you, Cynthia, for organizing this.
And Billy.
Thank you for having me. Billy?
It's all right. She can have all the credit.
Oh, yeah,
Give her the credit.
That's my job.
She needs that.
Very strange to find myself on a panel like So my younger sister is actually retired, she's not retired, but she was a town planner in New Hampshire. She is running for her planning and zoning board. Vote is tomorrow, we hope she wins, goes down New Hampshire. But she wrote, in one of her things, and it's so applicable, but this is what her saying, like anyone that's serving on a board or commission in a town. But it's so applicable to any of these things that we're doing. But listen to the community and recognize when change is needed, sort of to Dave's point. Over time, land use priorities, engineering standards, environmental concerns may change. Regulations and ordinances should be reviewed, updated accordingly. Be prepared for your meetings, review plans, come organized, be ready to listen, and be willing to ask questions. Treat applicants, abutters, town staff, obviously she's running for planning and zoning, but treat people with respect and common courtesy. Public hearings can become heated, and it's important to remain impartial, listen objectively as testimony is presented. And then follow the law. Don't prejudice an application or communicate about things, like make sure that your decisions are set in what your regulations are. And so I think those are just it was just so funny that she was writing that, and she was running tomorrow, and I'm like, that's totally applicable to anyone that's serving on a board or commission in a town, but just like in life in general. And so I'll let you know if she wins tomorrow. But there's a lot of people running for those seats, so.
Thanks. I just want to, Senator Long, you're very good, so I just want to take a moment to remind people that the bill 6890 is called Work, Live, Ride, not the Desegregate bill. So just want to put that out there. And the other thing is, I think, as you saw tonight, there is a lot of common ground. We all want the same thing. People accuse me of trying to destroy Ridgefield. Why would I want to destroy Ridgefield? I live there. I love the town. But I do recognize not only that we have needs, but also that we're part of a community that reaches beyond the borders of Ridgefield. So I would just urge us all to find that part in ourselves that lets us work together.
But what did we accomplish tonight? Did we accomplish anything tonight?
Yes, I heard a lot of comments that I agreed with from members of the panel who are ostensibly on, quote, the other side.
And that's
Yeah.
Marie.
I would agree with that. I think, the intentions are there, and I think that oftentimes they call us NIMBY, or that we're not interested in having affordable, we're just the party, we're just trying to be the no on, and that's the farthest from the truth. And we are always looking for solutions and ways to bring people together to collaborate. And I think the more that we have the opportunity to have things like this statewide, and I would hope that our legislators up in Hartford actually start to really heed and listen to those local P&Z experts, both parties, who are really well-intentioned and are doing very creative things. And I think that that's the most important thing here. I mean, I listened to Tony talk about his story about being an immigrant, and my father escaped communism from Hungary with a shirt on his back. I spoke Hungarian before I spoke English. I had to read contracts and write checks for my parents from middle school on. I mean, that's my experience. And I think that the American dream is homeownership. And I think, sometimes what we're losing in some of this is all of this idea of rentals and market value and everything, but really what we want to do is, as Tony mentioned, we have to address all those issues statewide about better jobs, about education that's a quality education for all, doesn't matter where you live. And those are the kind of important things that when we're focused on institutions and not on people, that's where we err. And that's, I think, the issue is sometimes up in Hartford, there's so many beholden tos on whether it's whatever it is, but it's institution-based, not necessarily looking out for the best interest of the people of our state. And I think the more we do that, the better off we'll be.
Okay. Well,
I want to say one thing while we're congratulating ourselves. We've been running a forum since 1987. We've posed questions, selling the water, boondoggle, property taxes, should annual town budgets require machine vote approval? this is the least amount of people we have ever
It's weird.
had.
We never understand.
And that's amazing. Something that is so critical when you say the American
It's
dream.
great.
And you're right, we're being shepherded through different. The American dream is being refashioned, reimagined. Everybody's gonna have a red. I'm just saying.